There are moments in true crime that stop you cold. Not because of the violence itself, but because of everything that surrounds it. The lies told in its wake. The narratives constructed to rewrite what actually happened. The millions of people who absorbed a false version of events and never learned the truth. This is one of those cases. On a spring afternoon in Frisco, Texas, a teenager named Austin Metcalf walked into a youth sporting event. He walked in with his brother. He walked in with friends. He walked in the way any teenager walks into any ordinary day, with no reason to believe it would be his last. By the time that day ended, Austin Metcalf was dead, stabbed at a youth sports complex in one of the safest, most family-oriented communities in the entire state of Texas. And then something extraordinary happened. Not just the arrest, not just the trial, not just the conviction. What happened after was a masterclass in how the internet can take a documented, evidence-supported case and attempt to burn it to the ground using nothing but manufactured outrage and deliberate misinformation. This is the full story. Every documented fact, every turning point, every lie that was told, and every moment the truth fought its way back to the surface. If you are new here, you are watching Case Hunt TV, where we follow the evidence, respect the victims, and let the facts do the talking. If this is the kind of content that matters to you, hit that subscribe button right now and leave a like on this video. It helps more people find the truth. Now let's get into it. Frisco, Texas is not the kind of place you associate with violent crime. It is a city that has spent the last 2 decades growing at a pace that astonished urban planners. Families moved there specifically for the schools, for the neighborhoods, for the sense of community that wraps itself around youth sports leagues, weekend tournaments, and the kind of suburban life that feels deliberately insulated from the chaos of the wider world. The Frisco Independent School District is one of the most well-resourced in the state. Its athletic facilities reflect that investment. Manicured fields, organized complexes, the kind of infrastructure that makes parents feel good about driving their kids 45 minutes on a Saturday morning just to watch them compete. Austin Metcalf was part of that world. A teenager embedded in the ordinary rhythms of youth athletics in suburban Texas. On the day everything changed, he was at a sporting event at one of these complexes, surrounded by teammates, spectators, and the kind of familiar crowd that fills these venues every single weekend across the state. His brother Hunter was there. Friends were there. It was supposed to be another day of competition, community, and going home tired and talking about it over dinner. That is the life Austin Metcalf was living. That is the life that was taken from him before that day was over. Karmelo Anthony was also at that sporting event, associated with a different group, a different team, moving through the same complex on the same afternoon. What we know about the events leading up to the confrontation comes from multiple sources: surveillance footage captured by Frisco ISD cameras, witness testimony presented during the trial, and the documented sequence of events that emerged through the legal proceedings. As the afternoon wore on, the weather began to change. Rain started falling over the complex. It was not, according to the footage later reviewed, the kind of torrential downpour that some accounts would later suggest. But rain is rain. And when it comes down at an outdoor sporting event, people start looking for cover. Karmelo Anthony and members of his group sought shelter in a dugout area on the field. That is a documented and reasonable response to rain at an outdoor sports complex. What happened next set the entire chain of events in motion. Event officials approached Karmelo's group and informed them they could not remain in the dugout. They needed to vacate. This directive, routine and unremarkable in the context of event management, became the pivot point around which everything else turned. With nowhere else to go in the immediate vicinity, Karmelo Anthony began walking across the complex. The surveillance footage captured this movement. He passed one canopy tent. He passed a second canopy tent. And then he arrived at a third tent, one that was already occupied by Austin Metcalf's group and, according to the evidence, other teams who were also sheltering from the rain. He sat down. That decision, to sit down in a space already occupied by another group, would trigger a confrontation that nobody who witnessed it that afternoon could have fully anticipated. The tent was not Karmelo Anthony's team's designated space. Other groups were already there. And when he sat down and showed no immediate intention of leaving, members of Austin Metcalf's group began asking him to go. This is not speculation. This is testimony. Multiple witnesses who were present and who testified at trial confirmed that Karmelo Anthony was asked to leave the tent area. The number of times he was asked, according to witness accounts presented in the proceedings, reached approximately 15. 15 requests. 15 separate moments where the confrontation could have de-escalated and dissolved into nothing. Where Karmelo could have stood up, walked to another part of the complex, waited out the rain somewhere else, and gone home that evening with his life fully intact and another family's life fully intact as well. He did not leave. For several minutes, the situation remained in a state of tense verbal exchange. The surveillance footage captured this period. And this detail matters enormously because it directly contradicts some of the most loudly repeated claims that would later circulate online. During this extended period captured on camera, there is no visible physical altercation. There is no visible surrounding. There is no visible aggressive posturing that would suggest an imminent physical attack on Karmelo Anthony. There are people present, there is movement, there is clearly a tense situation unfolding. But what the footage shows during these minutes is, by all documented analysis, a confrontation that had not yet turned physical. Then it did. The transition from verbal to physical happened in a single moment. After the extended back and forth, after the repeated requests, after the sustained refusal, someone pushed Karmelo Anthony. One push. A physical directive that communicated in the most direct possible terms that he needed to leave. What Karmelo Anthony did in response to that push was not another push. It was not a shove back. It was not a punch or any other proportional physical response. Karmelo Anthony produced a knife and stabbed Austin Metcalf. The surveillance footage captured this. The motion is visible in the footage. A sudden, violent movement followed immediately by Karmelo exiting the tent area at speed. Within seconds of the stabbing, he was running. He cut diagonally across the bleachers. He stumbled at one point, fell, got back up, and kept running. He exited the frame of the surveillance camera entirely. He was gone. Under that tent, Austin Metcalf was not gone. Austin Metcalf was dying. Emergency services responded to the Frisco ISD sports complex. Austin Metcalf had sustained a stab wound. Despite the response and the efforts made, Austin Metcalf died. A teenager, at a youth sporting event, on what should have been an ordinary Saturday afternoon in suburban Texas. His brother Hunter was there. Hunter Metcalf had been at that same complex, part of that same group, present in the orbit of everything that happened. The specific details of Hunter's direct involvement in the confrontation were examined during the trial and became a point of significant public debate in the months that followed. But the foundational, documented, undeniable fact at the center of everything is this. Austin Metcalf was stabbed and killed, and the person who stabbed him was identified as Karmelo Anthony. Law enforcement identified Karmelo Anthony. He was arrested and charged with murder in the death of Austin Metcalf. The case moved through the Texas court system and ultimately went to trial. The trial of Karmelo Anthony produced a substantial body of evidence for the jury's consideration. Witness testimony from people who had been present at the complex that afternoon was heard. Physical evidence related to the stabbing was examined. And critically, the surveillance footage captured by Frisco ISD cameras was presented in the courtroom. This is an important detail to hold on to, because one of the most aggressively repeated claims in the online discourse surrounding this case was that the surveillance footage was never shown to the jury. That claim is false. The footage was presented. People in that courtroom, on multiple sides of the case, saw it. The defense's position was self-defense. The argument was that Karmelo Anthony had been placed in a situation of physical threat, and that his response, while lethal, was a reaction to that threat. The prosecution's counter-argument rested on a documented sequence of events. Karmelo Anthony had entered a space that was not his, had been asked repeatedly to leave, had refused, and had responded to a push, a single push, with a knife. The jury deliberated. They returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of murder. Karmelo Anthony was convicted. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. And that is when the real storm began. In the weeks and months following the conviction, something remarkable and deeply troubling took hold across social media platforms. A narrative emerged, built and amplified by content creators and online advocates with substantial audiences, that Karmelo Anthony had been wrongfully convicted, that the system had failed him, that the evidence, specifically the surveillance footage, actually proved his innocence and showed him being attacked by a group of 5 or more people before he defended himself. One YouTube creator with over 1 million subscribers made the claim with absolute certainty. He asserted that the footage showed Austin Metcalf as the aggressor, that Austin pushed Karmelo, that Austin's brother Hunter was centrally involved in a physical assault on Karmelo, and that at least 5 people had jumped Karmelo before the stabbing occurred. He presented these claims not as theories or interpretations, but as documented facts, as things that were visible and clear on the video. Another prominent online voice raised questions about why the defense had not played the footage in court, suggesting it would have proven self-defense, and implying that either the defense attorney was incompetent or that something more sinister was at play. The framing was emotional, urgent, and designed to generate maximum outrage. These claims spread rapidly. The case acquired a racial dimension in online discourse, with some advocates framing it as a story about a black teenager being railroaded by a system unwilling to recognize his right to defend himself. That framing, emotionally resonant and tied to legitimate historical concerns about racial disparities in the justice system, gave the misinformation additional momentum and made it significantly harder to challenge without the challenge itself being mischaracterized. The problem was simple and devastating. The claims were not true, and the people making the most dramatic claims about what the video showed had either not seen it, had seen it and were misrepresenting it, or were deliberately fabricating details and mixing them with just enough accurate information to make the fabrications difficult to separate from the truth. The first significant crack in the manufactured narrative came from an unexpected source. Before the surveillance footage was released to the general public following the conclusion of the trial, an interview surfaced featuring Karmelo Anthony's own spokesperson. In that interview, the spokesperson was asked to speak to the claims being made about the footage by outside advocates. The spokesperson's response was measured, and it was honest in a way that directly contradicted everything the online advocates had been saying. He acknowledged that the footage shown in the courtroom was grainy and difficult to interpret with precision. He acknowledged that while you could count bodies and identify the presence of multiple people in the frame, you could not distinguish faces. You could not clearly identify Karmelo Anthony or Austin Metcalf individually in the footage. He acknowledged that some people were claiming they could see Karmelo being jumped in the footage, and he stated directly that he could not see that. Another person who had been present in the courtroom and viewed the footage confirmed the same thing in the same interview. They stated clearly that they did not see Karmelo being jumped. They saw movement. They saw multiple people in proximity. But the dramatic, detailed account being promoted by outside advocates, that account did not match what they had observed. This was a remarkable moment. The people closest to the defense, the people with every reason to want the narrative of jumping and self-defense to be true, were on record saying the footage did not show what the advocates claimed it showed. They knew the footage was going to be released publicly. They were protecting their credibility in advance of that release. The advocates continued anyway. One particular account circulating online became a case study in how misinformation is most effectively constructed and spread. A woman identifying herself as an advocate for Karmelo Anthony described what she claimed to have seen when she watched the footage at the Frisco ISD facility. Her account was detailed and specific. She described Karmelo sitting under the canopy for approximately 8 to 9.5 minutes before the confrontation escalated. She described a boy in a black hoodie approaching him first. She described a group of additional boys crossing the field and arriving at the tent. She described what she called commotion, and then described Karmelo being assaulted, being pulled back into the group when he tried to escape, having to crawl backwards away from his attackers, being held by his hoodie, and then running diagonally across the bleachers before falling. Here's the thing about that account. Some of those details are accurate. They align with what the footage actually shows. Karmelo did sit under that canopy for several minutes before the confrontation escalated. He did run diagonally across the bleachers. He did fall during that run. But woven into those accurate details were fabrications. The claims about being assaulted, about being pulled back in, about being held by his hoodie while trying to escape. Those claims are not supported by the footage that was subsequently released publicly. They are additions, inventions mixed into the framework of real events to make the entire account seem credible. This is how effective misinformation operates. It does not construct an entirely false narrative from scratch. It takes a foundation of verifiable truth and builds onto it, adding the false elements in a way that makes them nearly impossible to extract without seeming to deny the true elements as well. It is a technique, whether deployed consciously or through the distorting lens of genuine advocacy bias, that can be extraordinarily effective at shaping public perception. And for a time, it worked. Then the footage was released. Following the conclusion of the trial, Frisco ISD released the surveillance footage to the public. Approximately 10 minutes of footage, covering the period leading up to and including the stabbing, became available for anyone to watch. Not the body camera. Footage from law enforcement. The school district's own surveillance footage from cameras positioned around the complex. The footage showed what it showed. It showed Austin Metcalf entering the park through the entrance camera, alive, walking into what would become his final day. It showed the wider field, the dugout area, the multiple canopy tents positioned around the complex. It showed Karmelo Anthony's group being directed out of the dugout and Karmelo walking across the complex, passing one tent then another, before arriving at the third. During the extended period under the tent, the footage is wide angle, and the resolution has its limitations. This aligns precisely with what Karmelo's own spokesperson had acknowledged before the release. You can identify the presence of people. You can observe general movement. You cannot, with any reliable specificity, distinguish individual faces or assign specific actions to specific individuals with certainty during the confrontation period. What is visible in the documented analysis of the footage is the following: a period of extended interaction with no visible physical altercation, followed by a visible push, followed immediately by a motion consistent with a stabbing, followed by Karmelo Anthony exiting the tent at speed, running diagonally across the bleachers, stumbling and falling, recovering, and fleeing the frame entirely. What is not visible in the footage is a jumping. What is not visible is Karmelo being surrounded and assaulted before he produced the knife. What is not visible is the level of detail, the clarity, the definitiveness that the loudest online advocates had been insisting upon for weeks. The footage said what the footage said, and what it said aligned not with the advocates, but with the conviction. The reckoning that followed was incomplete, as reckonings in the social media era tend to be. The creators who had made definitive claims about what the footage showed did not universally retract those claims or issue corrections. Some modified their positions slightly, retreating from the most specific assertions while maintaining the broader narrative of injustice. Others simply moved on to the next story, leaving behind audiences that had absorbed false information and had no particular reason to go looking for the correction. This is part of what makes the Karmelo Anthony case significant beyond its own facts. It is a documented example of how a real criminal case, with real victims and real evidence, can be publicly misrepresented on a massive scale, and of how difficult it is for the truth to fully recover the ground lost to a compelling and emotionally charged false narrative. Austin Metcalf's family endured not only the unimaginable loss of their son and brother, they endured a sustained public campaign that characterized Austin as an aggressor who had brought his fate upon himself. They watched as their loved one was reduced to a villain in a story told to justify his killing. Hunter Metcalf, Austin's brother, who was present on the day his brother was murdered, was publicly named by some advocates as a participant in an assault on Karmelo, a claim not established by the evidence presented at trial. The Metcalf family's grief was real. Their loss was real. Austin Metcalf deserved better than to be posthumously rewritten into a character who deserved what happened to him. The facts of this case do not support that rewriting. What the facts of this case actually support is straightforward, documented, and supported by the verdict of the jury that heard all the evidence. Karmelo Anthony entered a tent area that was not his. He was asked to leave approximately 15 times. He refused to leave. After an extended period of confrontation that was, according to the surveillance footage, not marked by visible physical assault on Karmelo during those minutes of dialogue, a push occurred. One push. In response to that push, Karmelo Anthony produced a knife and used it. Austin Metcalf died as a result. The jury found that this sequence of events constituted murder. They sentenced Karmelo Anthony to 35 years in prison. The legal process, the evidence, the testimony, and ultimately the footage itself all pointed in the same direction. The self-defense narrative advanced by online advocates was not supported by the footage they claimed would prove it. The people closest to the defense acknowledged as much before the footage was even publicly available, and when the footage was released, it confirmed what the verdict had already determined. There is something important to say about how we consume true crime content and true crime information in the current media landscape. The Karmelo Anthony case did not just reveal the facts of a murder in Frisco, Texas. It revealed something about how quickly false narratives can take root, how effectively they can spread, and how much damage they can do to the pursuit of truth and to real human beings caught in their path. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old. He was somebody's son. He was Hunter Metcalf's brother. He was a teenager in Frisco, Texas, who went to a sporting event and never came home. That is the core truth of this case. Everything else, all the noise, all the manufactured outrage, all the false claims about suppressed evidence and clear exoneration, all of it accumulated around that core truth and attempted to obscure it. The footage did not obscure it. The verdict did not obscure it. And this documentary, built on documented facts and supported by the evidence of the case, does not obscure it either. Austin Metcalf deserves to be remembered accurately. His family deserves to have the record reflect what actually happened. And the public deserves to know when they are being misled, who is misleading them, and why the difference between documented truth and manufactured narrative matters so profoundly in cases like this one. Karmelo Anthony is serving 35 years in a Texas prison for the murder of Austin Metcalf. That sentence reflects the judgment of a jury that heard the evidence, watched the footage, and considered the testimony. It reflects the documented sequence of a confrontation that did not have to end in death, that could have been walked away from at any of 15 separate moments, and that ended the way it did because of choices made under that canopy tent on an afternoon that should have been forgettable. Instead, it is a case that will be studied for what it tells us about violence, for what it tells us about the gap between social media narrative and documented reality, and for what it tells us about the enduring importance of following the evidence even when the evidence is inconvenient, even when it disrupts the story that some people very badly want to be true. The evidence was always there. The footage existed from the beginning. The testimony was heard. The verdict was rendered. And when the footage was finally released to the public, it confirmed what the evidence had always said. The story was never what the advocates said it was. It was always what the facts said it was. And the facts said that Austin Metcalf was murdered. And the jury agreed. That is the documented story of the Karmelo Anthony case. From the rain that fell over a Frisco sports complex, to the tent, to the 15 requests, to the push, to the knife, to the flight, to the death of Austin Metcalf, to the trial, to the verdict, to the misinformation campaign that followed, to the footage that dismantled it. Every piece of this story is supported by documented sources, court proceedings, and the surveillance footage that Frisco ISD released to the public. No claims in this documentary go beyond what the evidence and the legal record support, because at Case Hunt TV, we believe that the truth is compelling enough without embellishment, and that the victims of violent crime deserve coverage that honors their memory rather than exploiting their tragedy. If this video gave you something, if it cut through the noise and gave you the documented account of a case that too many people got wrong, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Case Hunt TV. Your support is what allows this channel to keep doing this work, to keep following the evidence, to keep telling the stories that matter, and to keep telling them the right way. Austin Metcalf deserved better than what happened to him on that afternoon in Frisco. The least we can do is make sure his story is told truthfully. This has been Case Hunt TV. We will see you on the next case.